I Breathe, a Marvel fanfiction written on AO3 by Frodo69. The link for this fanfiction will be in the description box below, so I encourage you all to go check it out. When Peter was little, his best friend was his inhaler. He went nowhere without the thing in case he had an attack. This was when he got bit by his radioactive spider. It not only gave him superpowers, but it also cured his asthma. At least, that's what Peter thinks, seeing as he's never had an attack since. May still made him carrying his inhaler with him at all times. She did not believe that he was completely cured all of a sudden. Peter protested at first, but gave in eventually. Now his inhaler is permanently living in the front of his backpack, just in case. Little did he know that would come in handy this week. "Can you pass me the screwdriver?" Tony asked. He was on the other side of the lab to where Peter was sitting. Both of them were working on their suits. Peter was fumbling with his web shooters, while Tony was improvising thrusters in his boots. Sure thing, Mr. Stark," Peter answered, grabbing the screwdriver and getting up from his seat. "Here you go." He handed it to Tony, who in turn smiled at him. "Thanks, kiddo." They worked in the lab since around 11 o'clock this morning, and it was now nearing dinner time. Tony looked at the clock. "How about we wrap this up today and order some food? What'd you think, kid?" "What? No, please, Mr. Stark. I just started to make progress on my new web shooter designs. Can we stay a little longer?" Peter looked at Tony with big, round eyes. "Nope. Spider babies with enhanced metabolisms need to eat regularly. We've been down here for way too long anyway." "But, Mr. Stark," Peter whined. Tony thought about it for a second. "Okay, fine. You win. We can keep working in the lab, but only after we've eaten something." "But," Tony cut him off. "No buts. Downstairs now." But, Peter," Tony said, with a stern look on his face. Peter just pouted and walked toward the elevator. "Why'd you keep treating me like a little kid?" "Because you keep acting like one." "What? I do not," Peter shrieked. "Sure you don't, kiddo. Now get yourself upstairs." Half an hour later, they were sitting at the kitchen counter, with dinner in front of them. They'd ordered food from a little Italian place down the street, as it was one of Peter's favorites. "Mr. Stark?" "Yeah, Pete?" "Do you ever cook, like ever, or do you just get takeout every night?" "Of course I cook. Just not very well. Why'd you ask?" "Oh, I was just thinking, maybe next time I'm here, we can cook together instead of ordering like we usually do. Not that I don't like this, but I just thought it'd be nice." Yeah, you're right. That just sounds like fun. You got anything in mind?" "A quiche, maybe? I used to make it with Ben, and it's not as difficult as you would think." Tony smiled at that. He thought it was nice that Peter wanted anything to do with him that used to do with his Uncle Ben before he passed. "Sure thing, bud. Whatever you want. Just send me the recipe, and I'll make sure we got all the ingredients." Peter smiled broadly. Thanks, Mr. Stark. You're the best," he said before shoving the last bite of lasagna into his mouth. Happy dropped Peter off at the tower the following Friday. He got out of the car, waving a quick goodbye to the bodyguard before heading towards the elevator. He stopped off into the penthouse kitchen, where he was meted with an array of ingredients for making quiche. "Hey, Peter," Tony said, entering the kitchen. "How was school?" Peter smiled upon seeing his mentor. "Good. I got an A on my math test." "That's great, kiddo. So proud of you." It wasn't a rare occurrence that Peter got good grades. He was one of the brightest kids Tony had ever seen. Still, he complimented him every time, mostly because he loved seeing Peter smile when he did so. "Shall we begin?" he asked, as Peter dropped his backpack into the room. "Yep, I'm ready." "Okay, it says here you should start by making the crust." Tony looked down at the recipe on his phone. Don't worry, Mrs. Stark. I know how to make a quiche off by heart." He walked into the kitchen counter and grabbed the bag of flour. "Okay, so we need 200 grams. Peter turned to grab the scale, but when he turned his back, he knocked over the bag of flour, and it fell to the floor and got everywhere, including on Peter's face. Tony was up in hysterics. He couldn't stop laughing. Meanwhile, Peter, who breathed in some flour, started coughing. Tony quickly sobered up when he saw Peter in distress. Hey, you're okay." He clapped his hand on the teen's back a few times. It didn't help. Instead of coughing, he'd now started wheezing. The flour irritated his lungs and it triggered an asthma attack. "Kiddo, talk to me, please. You're scaring me a bit." Peter sucked in another wheezy breath and whispered out, Back, before falling back into a breathing pattern May had taught him after he had his first attack as a child. Tony didn't understand why Peter needed his backpack, but decided to retrieve it anyway. He was gone for less than a minute, but to Peter it felt like ages. Black spots danced around his vision as he desperately tried to suck in whatever air he could. When Tony returned with his backpack, he quickly dove into the front pocket and grabbed his inhaler. He put it between his lips and took the first puff. He could feel his lungs fill up slightly with the albuterol. He breathed it in and out for 30 seconds before taking another one. He repeated this process twice until he was satisfied. All the while, Tony stood next to him, rubbing his back in silence. Sorry about that, he said, putting the inhaler back. Sorry about what? What the hell just happened, Peter? I think the flower triggered my asthma. You have asthma. Why didn't I know about this? I used to. I thought it was triggered by the bite. He coughed once more. Apparently not. Clearly. But you're okay now. Peter rubbed his sternum lightly before answering. My chest still hurts a little from the coughing, but yeah, I think so. Can we just clean up this mess before we continue? You're sure? Yes, I'm sure, he said before turning to the closet to get the vacuum. All right, Bambino, I'll help you. After dinner, they sat on the couch, watching Star Wars. After they finished baking quiches without further problems. You know what? Tony began. We should cook dinner for ourselves more often. That's great, Mr. Stark, but from now on, I think you can handle the flour. Tony chuckled. Sure thing, Pete. Oh, and Mr. Stark? Yeah, bud? Thank you for, everything. Oh, I love you, kiddo. I love you too, Mr. Stark.